Welcome to Grounded with John Tester and Maritza Giorgio. We want to start today with some news off the bat. We learned on Sunday that former President Joe Biden has an aggressive form of prostate cancer and that it has metastasized. And we will get to that conversation here a little bit more. But I wanted to ask you, Senator Tester, I mean, your family has been through a public cancer diagnosis and just kind of wanted to give you an opportunity to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, look, cancer's bad stuff. Everybody's affected by it at some point in time. Every family that I know of has been, and you just got to hope that modern medicine does what it needs to do to take care of it. And it's never easy, and it's always difficult, whether he's doing chemo or radiation or whatever treatment might be, whatever drugs he's going to be, um, you know, taking to deal with it. But in the end, it's hard, and hopefully, him and his wife and his family will be able to get through this. But it's hard, and the older you get, the harder it is. So our prayers are certainly with them, and thoughts, and hopefully they come through this in good shape.
And you, I mean, you had a closer relationship, it seemed from the outside, from me, to the Biden White House than previous administrations. I know you spent a lot of time there working on the infrastructure bill. I remember that interview clip I had of you went a little bit viral of you being in the Oval Office for the first time.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, like that relationship.
Well, look, I first met him when I came to the United States Senate. He was still a senator. It was before he was vice president. I served with him for a couple of years, and then he was uh, tapped by Obama to be his VP. And so I got a chance to work with him a little bit, coming out with the with our service in the Senate, and then of course he was vice president, and Max was still in the Senate then, and we dealt with Joe on a couple different things, mainly with military stuff with him. And he was always, Joe's always was pretty straightforward, pretty regular, pretty normal, which isn't necessarily the truth for most of the folks who serve in the Senate. And then, of course, as president, worked with him on two major issues. Worked with him actually on four different issues, but two of them pretty extensively. One was the infrastructure bill that you already referenced, and there were 10 folks. I was one of the five Democrats, and of course, there were five Republicans, and it was the largest investment in infrastructure since the year I was born, which was 1956. So it was pretty amazing to get that done. And it was, it was working with his staff, and every once in a while visiting with Joe about things that were important to him. And then, of course, the other one was the PACT Act, the bill that dealt with toxic exposure for our veterans. Uh, Absolutely never been done before in this country, and toxic exposure has been around for a long, long time. But worked with him. Part of his motivation, I believe, was the loss of his son to brain cancer, and so it was good. I mean, we worked with him a fair amount, especially the first 2 years he was in the presidency.
I had to laugh because I do remember I was talking to you after it must have been the infrastructure bill. And it was the first time you really had been in the Oval Office, and I asked you,
Yeah.
like, "What was that like?" And you were telling me about it, and
Yeah.
it was really cool, and people just seized on that, and
Yeah.
Ron
It was
Klain, like, retweeted it, and then it ended up in a Bob Woodward book, that
really.
moment. Yeah,
I'll
I
be
have it.
damned. I didn't. I guess I've got to read that book.
I have
Well,
it
I
in the
mean,
footnotes here.
the truth is that all through I served in the Senate. Bush's last 2 years as president, Bush two, and got to the White House, but never got to the Oval Office. In fact, got to the White House multiple times, and then when President Obama got to the White House mostly as a caucus. Went over when the caucus was invited, but never to the Oval Office. But it was. I mean, it seemed like it was in the first few months of Biden's administration we were invited over to visit about different policies, and it was pretty cool. Never been in there, and it was pretty cool. I'd been in some mock-ups of the Oval Office, but never in the real thing.
Yeah, I went to the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library mock-up, but I couldn't go sit down or anything, so
Damn, that's
all right,
tough.
so we have we do want to send our best wishes to the Biden family. I know there's even more scrutiny on them this week, and we've seen, well wishes turn to questions. So we want to send our thoughts to them, and we have quite a few other headlines to get to. A lot of them, though, are related to legal matters. So we're going to actually go back to law school. Go to law school for the first time for you and I, Senator, with our guest today, Dave Aronberg. He served as state attorney of Palm Beach County, Florida. He ran for attorney general of that state. He lost in the primary and was later appointed by then Florida AG Pam Bondi as the state's drug czar. Now, Pam Bondi, of course, is the current United States attorney general. So we'll ask him some about that. We want to say a big welcome to Dave for being with us today. Hey, Dave.
It's Senator, great to be here with you.
It's great to have you. So, you have, being from Florida, you've got some experience with our current U.S. Attorney General. And I'm gonna start out by asking you this. So the United States Attorney General is supposed to be the Attorney General for America, not the Attorney General for Congress, not the Attorney General for the White House, not the Attorney General for any single person, but the lawyer for the nation. Do you see Pam Bondi in that role right now? Do you think she's serving as the United States' lawyer? Or do you think she's serving as Donald Trump's lawyer? And yeah, we'll just start out there.
Well, I think that was decided in November of 2024 because Kamala Harris ran on having an independent attorney general in the Merrick Garland mold, and Donald Trump made it clear he wanted an attorney general who was going to be loyal to him. He wanted someone all along like Roy Cohn, and he appointed that person, Matt Gaetz. He appointed someone who he thought would do his bidding and really would blow the place up. It would just, light a fire under DOJ, and that's what Gaetz's mission was, and he was going to do it. But because he couldn't get through the Senate, he had to withdraw, and then he chose Pam Bondi. Now, I've known uh, Pam Bondi for years. I ran against her for attorney general in 2010, and then she won. I lost, and then she hired me to be her drug czar. So together we went after the pill mills and the oxycodone abuse. So back then it was a really strong bipartisan working relationship. Now, the Republican Party today is a party of one. It's a party of Trump. And I could say that it shouldn't be a surprise to any of us that he has transformed that office into an arm of the White House. After all, Congress is sort of an arm of the White House. That was never supposed to happen. But I will say this. If you saw that New York Times profile of her, it showed that both sides seem to be upset with her. My side of the aisle, of course, but also people in her own party because of Jeffrey Epstein and because she hasn't yet prosecuted Trump's political enemies. And I really believe that when it comes to that bright red line, whether or not she will prosecute Trump's enemies for political purposes without evidence, like Matt Gaetz would have, I don't think she does that. I don't think she goes that far. But yes, I always knew that I disagree with her on a lot of things, and I do. But remember, Trump ran on this. This is what he wanted. And there's nothing in the Constitution or the law that says that the attorney general cannot be close to the president. I mean, we saw that with JFK and his brother as the attorney general. So it's not like it's prohibited, but it's just custom that you should have independence there. It's just not required.
So when you talk about like that bright red line, you draw that line over going after his political enemies. But what about other things like the plane, this $400 million plane from Qatar, and she had said the gift. I mean, President Trump has said that Pam Bondi has told him the gift would be legally permissible. And our friend of the show, Senator Dick Durbin, actually sent a letter saying, like, "Hey, how is that? How is that? Because the Constitution prohibits gifts like this." And that Bondi previously worked as a lobbyist for Qatar. And we're finding out more and more, even just today, that the president kind of arranged this deal. It wasn't like a, hey, we want to give you this. It was arranged. So do you have some blurred lines there over her acting illegally?
Well, I thought with the comparison of the Statue of Liberty, I thought was was apt because you have to have an act of Congress. You have to have something that Congress passes to accept a gift. I have not seen Pam Bondi's letter, so I don't know what legal authority she's basing it on. But generally, I would think you'd have to have Congress to pass a measure to accept that kind of gift. Now, perhaps it's because they're saying he's not going to use it personally. It's going to be for the United States, and afterwards, it's going to be for his library. This could be tied up in court. I think because of the blowback he's getting from his own party, even that ultimately he won't take it and he'll blame the Democrats or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know how you can accept this kind of gift. But then again, I have not seen the legal authorities in the letter.
I would just tell you from my perspective, having served in Congress, man, you don't, I mean, the rules are such, you don't accept anything from anybody. I mean, you can't even accept a lunch from somebody without, being accused of being bought and paid for. And, a lunch in DC is expensive, but it certainly isn't 400 million bucks, it's crazy. It's crazy that we're even, I mean, from my perspective, having served there, it's crazy that that this is even being considered, quite honestly, because, a fellow senator of mine by the name of Bob Menendez, was convicted of taking a couple gold bars, which is a big damn deal, by the way, and he's been sentenced to prison. And now we've got the president of the United States that's saying, it's okay to take a $400 million plane from Qatar when, quite frankly, the laws are pretty clear about influence from foreign governments on us. But let's go to a different. I want to go to a different spot. Um, the Republican Party has always been known for not sticking their nose into people's private lives. At least that's the perception, and politics perception's reality. I brought up Pam Bondi this morning, and the first article was an article that said that she was going to ban paper straws, for Christ's sakes. I mean, what the hell is going on? I mean, really, this is an important enough issue that the attorney general's actually looking, hasn't done it yet, but is actually looking at banning things that actually makes no sense to ban whatsoever. I mean, I come from a state where there's a lot of wood products industry, so paper straws are a good thing. But what's your view on that? I mean, what's your view on just the whole thing about? I mean, she's a gifted lawyer. I think most people will tell you that, and I think you would agree with that too. If you don't, let me know. But everybody we've talked to says she's a very gifted attorney. So why would you be dealing with this kind of garbage?
I think a lot of this stuff is coming from the White House, Senator. I agree with you about General Bondi being a gifted, smart lawyer. I think a lot of these policies are coming out of the White House. I think they plan to drop the charges against Eric Adams, for example. That came from the White House. That was there before she came aboard. So some of these policies focusing on issues like banning paper straws. I mean, some of this also is just appeasing the far right, who are these conspiracy theorists who want to just they live their lives to own the libs. And one way to own the libs is to ban paper straws. Do you see this also in Congress, that you see some nutty ideas like you have Mike Lee putting a bill out to ban pornography? I mean, blatantly violating the First Amendment. They just have these things out there. How about giving $5 million to Ashley Babbitt's family? Ashley Babbitt, who was a domestic terrorist. We're going to reward her family with $5 million. So, these are things that the far right, the extremists, they make a lot of noise and they get attention. And we saw that with Jeffrey Epstein. They were given these booklets that were supposedly inside information, but really the information that's out there that can be provided is limited. I mean, a lot of the stuff's already come out, but they believe there's this massive conspiracy theory. So I like to say, the alligator is always hungry. You can try to feed him. You're never going to placate him.
Let me talk about something that I'm pretty concerned about, and that's due process, habeas corpus. People having claims put against them by the government or by anybody for that matter, and not being able to determine whether they're innocent or guilty because they don't get their due process. You're sitting there, you're an attorney, you know the players. Do you think due process in this country's gone, or do you think we're just having this debate for the sake of distraction.
Due process is alive, but it's not doing well. But I would say kudos to the courts. Article 3 judges. You see, our Constitution, our system of our democratic checks and balances, the republic we live in, all the above, it all depends on three branches of government that interact with each other and balance each other out. But what happens when one branch of the government decides to self-emasculate, decides to cede all of its power to the executive branch? We've never seen this before in history. And that's Congress. The weakness of the leadership in Congress has just ceded all authority to the White House. And that will continue until November of 2026, when there's a takeover of the House. But until then, we're seeing that it's up to the courts to provide the guardrails. And because the courts have stepped up, I do think we still have due process. The Supreme Court came out with a remarkable ruling on a Saturday at 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. where they said, stop the deportations. That was remarkable because it's questionable whether the Supreme Court even had jurisdiction over that matter. The matter was still in the lower courts. So that to me said something. And now you saw the Roberts Court by a 7-2 vote saying, stop. Now, end all these deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. And that's including all three justices appointed by Donald Trump. So if you ask me if due process is still alive, yes, it's still alive because the courts have stepped up. These are judges and justices appointed by both Democrats and Republicans. But it's not doing super well because we've seen the administration say they're going to not abide by lower court judges, but they are so far abiding by the Supreme Court. So far, it's still alive. It's just not as strong as it was before Trump took over.
Well, I would push back on you there on just that point, Dave, because Kilmar Abrego Garcia is still very much in El Salvador, as far as I know. And didn't the Supreme Court say that the Trump administration had to facilitate his return? So, I mean, what's going on there?
The word is facilitate. That's a vague enough word that it allowed the administration to drive a train through that loophole. See, that was the problem. And that wasn't the original word used by the lower court. See, the Supreme Court decided to soften the language because they wanted unanimity, and they got unanimity on that decision, 9-0. They wanted Clarence Thomas and Alito to go along with it. But in the quest for unanimity by Chief Justice Roberts, they created this loophole that has allowed the Trump administration to say, well, facilitate means we're going to send a plane and it's up to El Salvador to release him. But of course, we know that if the Trump administration wanted El Salvador to release Abrego Garcia, that dude would be on the first flight, first class on the way back, because we're the ones paying for that detainment. And so I think I blame the Supreme Court on that one more than I blame the administration, because the Supreme Court enabled the administration to have this, see no evil, hear no evil policy where, like, I don't know, I can't do anything about it. I don't see any problem here. And I think the Supreme Court is going to have to get tougher and use more exacting language.
What word did the lower court use? What was more exacting?
It was, yes, I'll get it. I knew you'd follow up. You're a great journalist, Senator. I'll get it. It was, oh gosh, it was Judge Zinnes, and I'm going to. She said facilitate and effectuate. She used both words. And then the Supreme Court removed the word effectuate. So yeah, we can talk about that.
So that was intentional. I mean, to remove effectuate, the Supreme Court analyzes every single word in every decision, right? I mean, there's no word haphazardly put in their rulings. So they deliberately took effectuate out.
Right. And Trump knew that, saw that. His lawyers exploited that. It was originally facilitate and effectuate. And the Supreme Court removed the word effectuate. So that created that loophole. And that's the problem. At some point, they're going to have to revisit that, and they're going to have to strengthen that word and say, no, bring him back now. You are responsible for him. But right now, they are moving in that direction. I mean, they issued a ruling that put the kibosh on these deportations. So that's why I don't think that due process is dead. I don't think our democracy is dead, because the Supreme Court has stepped up. I think it becomes a coup when the administration says the Supreme Court has ruled, let them enforce their ruling, where we are not. We are going to go in a different direction. They have not said that. Trump has repeatedly said that he's going to comply with the Supreme Court. Now, I know that deeds are different than his words, that they seem to be playing games with these court rulings. But as long as Trump is saying that we will comply with the Supreme Court, then I think we've averted a coup, even if we are stepping closer to a constitutional crisis.
I have two threads to pull on that, though. Okay, so number one, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is one man, and there were hundreds who were sent to El Salvador without due process. A lot of them we don't even know. I mean, I haven't seen charging documents. I know there's that list of names that was uncovered and reported, but there's so many other people that we're not talking about. And we do know that the Supreme Court, wasn't the Supreme Court. It was another court that just said, hey, you need to allow lawyers in to see another Venezuelan man who was deported. But I mean, for those people who are down there, they didn't get due process. So what's next for them? And then the second thread I would like to pull is, this talk about suspending habeas corpus from Stephen Miller and what that will look like. So,
right. Well, he can't do it. You just can't unilaterally suspend habeas corpus. It's done very infrequently over the years, and it is like, for example, when we're at war or there's some extreme emergency within the country. It's not the policy that's been around for years, for decades, about immigration, and we may disagree with that policy. That's not a crisis that could warrant the suspension of habeas corpus. So that's not going to happen. And as far as the individuals who are in that facility in El Salvador, who are not named Abrego Garcia, I think what's happening there is that the courts said that you can get habeas corpus, but you have to go to a district court judge. So the difference is that originally the advocates for these individuals wanted to do a class action and get it in front of the same judge in Washington, D.C. And the Supreme Court, in a narrow ruling, said, no, the process is you need to go to your district court and appeal it there to the local district court judge. That makes it harder for their lawyers, makes it more time intensive, but at the same time, it is due process and it is habeas.
So how do you do that if you're in a prison in El Salvador?
Well, these individuals have advocates. There are lawyers who are working full time on behalf of wrongly deported individuals. And so they are out there and they are filing lawsuits. It
So
makes it harder.
they go to the district court which they lived in. Is that the deal before they were taken to El Salvador, or where do they go?
Yeah, that's a good jurisdictional question. You can do it in the facility, I would say, that is holding the individuals before they were deported. You can do it there. You could also go into the community, I would say, in the federal district court where that person lives. But it does make it harder because if you're a lawyer representing them, it's much easier to say, I represent everyone in the country in this class, and we're going to one judge. Instead, you've got to go to possibly 10 different judges with 10 different lawsuits. Much more time intensive, much more expensive. And it does make it harder for an individual to find a lawyer because that lawyer could be representing people in just one jurisdiction as opposed to representing everyone at the same time in Washington, D.C.
All right. So we started out this conversation saying that President Trump made it pretty clear, and you're correct, by the way, and it's a good point to make, made it pretty clear when he was running that he wanted an attorney general who was going to look after him. He's also said things about his political enemies, about people who demonstrate in opposition to some of his policies, shoot their legs out from under him and all that kind of stuff. At one point in time, I mean, he said it during the campaign and he's done it. And he's done a lot of things during the campaign. The 2025 document is being implemented, chapter and verse every day. And he said he didn't know anything about that when he was running, but he did, and it's being implemented. What about the attorney general? They're talking about changing it so they can indict members of Congress easier. Um, it seems like this is the agenda about taking care of his political enemies. Is that I just, on one hand, I hear people say all the time, well, Trump says stuff, but he never means it. But this term's different. He said this stuff and he's doing it. And we've never been, at least never been outwardly about going after political enemies. I mean, and using the government to do it. I don't believe that's ever happened. And you can correct me. You probably know the history better than I do. But at what point in time should we say, well, you know what? Um, this stuff is heading down the wrong direction, and we've got to figure out a way to stop it. And you are absolutely right, by the way, 100% right. I've said it before, and you just said it very, very well. Congress shouldn't even be getting paid because they perform no role here in anything as far as checks and balances go.
Senator, it's so frustrating, and especially since you were a member of that body, of that august body, that they continue to embarrass themselves every day, but just fawning over this president. But it's not even in love; it's because of fear. And the difference with this term compared to the first one is that Trump has a heavy. He has Elon Musk and his unlimited dollars, who could just drop 15 million on any Republican primary campaign to destroy someone in a primary, and so they're so scared of it because the number one priority for these people is to get reelected. And they know that because of gerrymandered districts, they're unlikely to lose to a Democrat, but they could lose to a fellow Republican. So they're so scared into compliance. I would love to have secret votes. I would love to have a secret ballot for a lot of these measures. I bet you nothing would ever go through. This big, beautiful budget bill would have been DOA from the beginning. But here we are. And you asked me what is like the line. When should we really worry? And I really think it's when, and I still believe that this attorney general is not going to cross that line, which is to prosecute Trump's political enemies, the Adam Schiffs and Tony Fauci's and the Biden family, even though they all had pardons. I just think that when it comes to that, there is pressure to do so. Yes, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump. But as a lawyer, if you go down that road and you do so, it will blow back in your face. Just ask John Durham and Bill Barr. They went after individuals, low-level individuals, on the so-called Russia hoax, and juries acquitted very quickly, and they were humiliated. Prosecutors don't want that as their legacy. That's the legacy of John Durham, embarrassment. And it could be worse. If you prosecute people without evidence, you end up like Mike Nifong, the former Duke lacrosse prosecutor, who not only was disbarred, he was put in jail. So Pam Bondi knows this. She's a 20-year prosecutor, and she knows if you just start inventing charges without real evidence, it's going to destroy your career and possibly take away your freedom. So I don't think that's going to happen. Now, will I eat crow one day where political opponents are charged? Well, yeah, that's always possible, but I don't think so. But if that happens, I'll come on by, eat a plate of crow, maybe some humble pie. But I do think that is a line that is not going to be crossed.
But I mean, you have to know going in that you're going to be asked things, right? I mean, you have to know kind of the motivations and some of the things that have been said. So at what point do you think if she says, no, I'm not going to do that, then he says, all right, you're out as AG?
Yeah, well, I think that's always a possibility. But, she's going to launch the investigations. And people are upset about that. They say, look at the investigations. This is ridiculous. But I say that that's happened before. That happened in the previous term. That's what Bill Barr did. He launched investigations into Trump's enemies. And I mean, Andrew McCabe was on the cusp of being prosecuted, but the grand jury apparently denied it. So you have lots of examples of that. In fact, you had cases filed, but that's why I thought having Matt Gaetz as attorney general would have been so dangerous. He didn't care. He wanted to do that. And I think that's the difference here. Now, I say that knowing that, for example, they indicted a judge in Wisconsin who apparently, has been accused of sending a undocumented migrant through a separate door, private door away from ICE. Now, here's the thing. When those charges were filed, people were up in arms saying, yeah, there's an example of going after political enemies. But that wasn't a judge who ruled against them. That was a judge who they were saying obstructed justice. I don't put that in the same category. And after they filed those charges, then that judge was indicted by a grand jury. That's one of our guardrails, is to have the grand jury. So I don't put that in the same category. She will probably be exonerated, I believe. But in the meantime, I don't think that's the same as inventing charges against Adam Schiff because he was part of the committee that investigated Donald Trump. So I still believe that there are enough guardrails out there that you won't see the worst abuses, even though it's frustrating that we're seeing things that we've never seen before and we should never see again.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about is that, the U.S. Attorney Alina Hava, she dropped the case against the Newark mayor after that protest outside the ICE facility in Jersey. But now they are bringing charges against Congresswoman LaMonica McIver, charging her with assault. Um, I mean, we talked about this, Senator, that members of Congress have every right to go in and say we want to see what's happening.
Part of their job. It's part of their job.
Right, and so they're charging her with assault, and Democratic lawmakers came to her defense quickly and said, "Hey, she toured that facility afterward. If there was an assault, they wouldn't have allowed her to tour it." But as you noted, Dave, I mean, this comes the same week we learn of a $5 million settlement to the family of Ashley Babbitt, and she was, trying to climb through a shattered window into the House chamber.
She's a domestic terrorist. And she was radicalized through Trump's rhetoric, and she went to the Capitol. She trespassed, got inside there illegally, and then broke through a glass to get to the Capitol after being warned. And in self defense, the officer shot, and she was killed. It was tragic that it had to happen, but to reward her family for, by all accounts, was a justified shoot. The fact is, there was an investigation. There were several investigations, and it was justified. It was a police officer doing his job. I mean, it's just, to me, is just so wrongheaded to reward them with $5 million of taxpayer money. That
Well, and we
is
saw,
something
I
I
mean,
strongly
I think
disagree with.
the difference is, like, we saw, I remember sitting in this room watching that play out, texting with Senator Tester's staff, texting with Senator Daines' staff, like, what is happening, watching that whole thing play out. I haven't seen any video of Congresswoman McIver assaulting anybody. Have you?
I have not. They're gonna have to have real evidence on that one, and they're gonna have to get an indictment. It's gonna have to go through a grand jury. So I don't know. I have not seen that. Um, Another example, though, where I think that prosecutors realize that their hands are tied, is that, for example, you remember Ed Martin, who is the guy who had to withdraw because he was friends with a promoter of a Nazi sympathizer. He's the radical former interim DC U.S. attorney. And he was going after all of Trump's priorities, like the Biden family, and doing all these things way outside the pale. Well, even he, when it came to prosecuting the guy who allegedly assaulted Nancy Mace, who was arrested for this. You remember there was a guy who went up to Nancy Mace, and Nancy Mace said he shook her hand too aggressively, so he was arrested for it. He apparently was an advocate for transgender rights, and even Ed Martin dropped those charges. Said, there's just not enough evidence here. That was Ed Martin, and so that's why, yeah, as a former prosecutor, it's not just full discretion that we get. You have guardrails in place that should work, and I do believe that unless there's real evidence that this congresswoman committed an assault, she's going to go free. It doesn't justify the charges, but if they must have some sort of evidence that led to probable cause here, and probable cause is a low standard.
Look, we could visit all day. I really appreciate your perspective. I really do. I think it gives our viewers and listeners a different perspective than what we tend to make. I will also tell you, though, in full disclosure, that Pam Bondi, I believe she's a good attorney and I believe she's smart, but she worries the hell out of me. I mean, when she does things like sells stock the day the tariffs are announced, that isn't what I would classify as being something that a good, honest, decent person would do. And I think we need good, honest, decent people in government, quite frankly. And so that's kind of the point of all this, is that if the system's going to work and it's going to work the way the forefathers intended, it's going to work the way it has worked my entire life and yours too. You got to have people that respect the institutions and respect the law and respect the Constitution.
Well, Senator, I really appreciate being on a show with you and Maritza, and I understand. When I voted for Kamala Harris, and I thought that was a big part of it, was that I wanted the independence of the judiciary and the independence of prosecutors at DOJ.
Yep.
Uh, but we lost that battle, And as I've said to others, that it could be a lot worse. The first choice for Attorney General, Matt Gaetz. And I do believe that because Pam has been prosecutor 20 years, that when it comes to that line, that I said I will disagree with her on a lot of things. And people come back and they say, aha, you said she'd be great. I, I said that she'd be the best thing that she'd be better than Matt Gaetz and the best that the Democrats could expect. But if it's not Pam Bondi, it's going to be like Rudy Giuliani or maybe the My Pillow guy with a law degree, and that law degree would come from Trump University. So let's put it all in perspective here.
The My Pillow guy. Let me ask you really quick. I mean, we do see Judge Jeanine Pirro being appointed as a U.S. attorney, and also, I mean, I have so many thoughts, but let me ask you before we go, because this is in the headlines a lot this week. James Comey, right? The guy everybody loves to hate, James Comey, and he took that picture of the seashells, and now we hear that Tulsi Gabbard is saying he belongs in prison over it. He's been questioned. You see anything coming out of that?
No, I think that they can bring it to the grand jury if they want to, but that's not going anywhere. He's not going to get, if he gets prosecuted for this, it will be pie in the face for everyone who touches that. I would hope that they treat the attempted bombing of IVF clinics as half as seriously as they're treating a bunch of seashells being shaped in a form that says 8647 or whatever it said. I mean, like James Comey, you're right. He's the person everyone loves to hate. I still say that he's most responsible for Donald Trump's election the first time around. And he should also realize, just read the room. I mean, this is not the time where you want to do something like that, especially if your name is James Comey and you have a target on your back. You put something like that out. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, dude, you're just going to open up a can of worms. But should he be prosecuted for it? No, of course not. I mean, so much worse is being said all the time by members of Trump's team. I mean, gosh, you don't want to go down that road of criminalizing that kind of free speech. But it's James Comey who created this controversy. But if the prosecutors decide to charge, it will be on them, and they will regret it.
All right, Senator, don't take any pictures of any seashells, okay?
It's hard to find them, although my farm was underwater millions of years ago. So there are some
Okay.
shells out there if you dig deep enough.
That's right.
Uh,
Okay.
This-
Dave Aronberg, our guest today, served as state attorney of Palm Beach County, Florida. Thanks so much for being with us, Dave.
Thanks for having me. Love the
It
show.
is, it's been great to have you on. Thanks a bunch. Thanks for your time. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Final thoughts.
Well, I mean, I think it was great to have Dave on. Gives us a little different perspective and gives us a little hope. I think. I think too many of us are bogged down by the despair of what's going on in this administration. I see what's going on, and it doesn't make you feel good. It doesn't make you feel good about the direction of the country. And I think it's helpful to get somebody on that actually has worked with some of the people in the administration and knows them, um, and uh, and can give you their perspective on how they see them moving forward on issues that I think are critical to this country and critical to the democracy. But we'll see. I mean, I think he'll tell you. I think Dave would tell you that this is the way he sees it. He's not necessarily right all the time, but hopefully he's right on the fact that they'll obey the rule of law and due process and those kind of things.
Here's one other thing that I was thinking about when he was, talking about, let's say, the folks who were in that prison in El Salvador. And I remind people of this too, on the journalism side, that even though we don't see what's happening, that you and I don't see the lawyers working behind the scenes, they're doing it and they're working behind the scenes. And I always say that about journalists too. Like, if there's some big smoking gun conspiracy, or even just like a thought of one, there are journalists in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere who want that scoop. So they're working behind the scenes, and you might not hear about it, but they're working to expose it. And same with the lawyers, I think, in this case.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good thing, and that's hopefully that'll make it so our kids can have the same kind of country we've grown up in moving forward, because that's what's really ultimately important here. So
Okay,
it's
so
good.
you are visiting family,
Yeah.
and you had with you the M Sun hat but decided that you didn't want to confuse me again. So you're wearing a Brooks and Dunn hat. Are you a
Yeah.
fan?
I like Brooks and Dunn, but my daughter really likes them. And they put a concert on here about a month ago, and I think this hat was part of the concert thing. They bought it, and I think it was Dunn was sicker than a dog, and damn near, in fact, didn't finish the concert because he was so sick.
Oh,
Yeah.
she let you wear her hat.
So I'm wearing her hat. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. There
good.
you go. But
All
it's
right.
good. I'm a music major, so I like Brooks and Dunn.
Yeah, I know. I always forget that. You played the trumpet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Past tense. Yes, I did.
You don't still?
Very seldom. There's just never occasion to do it. And when there is occasion, it takes me too long to get the chops back into shape to be able to play decently.
All right. Well, but my son plays the trumpet. Maybe you guys can have a little duet
We'll
sometime.
do a duet. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to thank our guest, Dave Aronberg, for being on with us and going through kind of just several legal tangents with us. But I think they're interesting conversations. I might just be a huge nerd, but I thought it was interesting. And we want to thank our friends at Pearl Jam for letting us use their music, to you, our listeners. And don't forget, you can find us on Substack, Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also email us at groundedpcast@gmail.com.
Yeah. This podcast was kind of like a pre-law course. So now
I
people who want to
know.
go to law school know what you're in for. At
That's
any rate,
right.
thanks for listening. Thanks for viewing, and tally ho.